The day Bertha married Morris felt like a sunrise she could touch. The hall glittered with chandeliers, but it was the warmth in Morris's eyes that steadied her trembling hands. "You're safe with me," he whispered as the choir softened, and she believed him because his voice had always sounded like a door opening. She came from a modest home where joy was counted in careful savings and shared meals. He came from a world where wine was poured before you asked. Yet in the middle of those gold-edged plates and silk chair ribbons, Bertha saw only their joined fingers and a future she would water with kindness. After the vows, he kissed her forehead, lingering, and told the room, "This woman is my miracle." She smiled so widely her cheeks ached, unaware that miracles can be misread by men who learn the wrong lessons from applause. That night, as they drove away, she tucked her head on his shoulder and said, "Let's promise to never let the noise inside." Morris laughed softly, "I'll build you walls." And Bertha, heart blooming, did not yet know that some walls are built to keep someone out, sometimes the very person who begged to be let in. The first weeks were a quilt of small tendernesses. Morris brewing her tea perfectly balanced with honey. Bertha ironing his shirts with notes tucked into pockets. "Proud of you. Drive safe. Call me if you forget lunch." He told her about contracts and ambitious plans, sketching dreams on napkins like a boy excited about a kite he hadn't yet flown. She listened with attentive eyes, asking questions he said no one else ever asked. "You make me feel seen," he told her, thumb grazing her ring. Bertha organized the apartment into a refuge, fresh flowers on Fridays, a calendar pinned with color-coded deadlines and date nights, a casserole that tasted of home. When she touched his face and said, "This is where I live," Morris closed his eyes as if her hand were a blessing. The world outside was loud with congratulatory noise, but their evenings were soft, 2 breaths sinking. Bertha fell asleep each night thinking the universe had finally chosen her. She did not know it had also chosen to test the shape of her faith. It began at a family brunch where laughter sounded like glass, bright, thin, breakable. A cousin asked about Bertha's background with a smile too tight, and someone murmured, "She's sweet, just not our circle." Bertha pretended not to hear, cutting fruit she no longer wanted, but Morris caught the flicker in her eyes. "We don't entertain small minds," he announced lightly, draping an arm over her chair. In the car, she tried to make it nothing. "They'll come to know me," she said, practicing hope like an instrument. He kissed her knuckles. "They will." But at night, as parties multiplied and invitations glimmered, Morris's gaze started drifting toward women who moved like they knew they were being watched, toward voices polished by old schools and old money. "You're comparing again," Bertha whispered once, and he frowned. "I'm benchmarking," he replied. She laughed to soften it, but a thread pulled loose. At a gala, a woman in silver leaned in close to Morris, talking in fluent industry jargon that sounded like coded intimacy. Bertha stood a step behind, clutching her clutch tighter. When they got home, she tried to tease him out of the silence. "Your world moves so fast," she said. "Sometimes I feel like I'm still lacing my shoes." He glanced at her, kind but elsewhere. "You're fine, Bee. Don't overthink." In bed, he scrolled his phone under the duvet's dim cave. She lay staring at the ceiling fan and named each blade after a promise they made. Loyalty. Softness. Tomorrow. The 5th blade wouldn't hold a word. "Morris?" she asked finally. "We're okay, right?" He set his phone down and kissed her cheek. Always. It sounded right. It did not feel rooted. Before the wedding, there had been a stack of documents laid like a quiet trap on polished wood. Routine, Morris had said, casual in a way that made refusal feel dramatic. They sat at a glossy table under an indifferent clock. The pages rustled with language Bertha trusted because she trusted him. "It's about prudence," he explained, drawing circles with his pen. "Investors expect discipline." She smiled, embarrassed by her own caution. "I don't want your money," she'd said, pressing the pen to the dotted lines. "I want your Mondays and your bad jokes." He chuckled, kissed her temple, and turned pages. The clause, thin as a blade, buried in legal neatness, described conditions under which she would forfeit any claim if she failed to uphold her role as wife, a phrase so vague because vagueness is a net that catches anything. Years later, He would pull those papers from a drawer and lay them on his desk like a memory he had trained to be obedient. But on that early afternoon, the sun had been kind and Bertha's heart loud. "We're not those people who need contracts," she said with a playful roll of her eyes. "We're better." "We are," Morris agreed, holding the page so she could sign more easily. He told himself the clause was just caution, a guardrail he'd never need. He told himself love and leverage could share a house. He told himself many things because ambition has its own lullabies, and some men fall asleep to the sound of what makes them feel protected. Their small apartment turned into a headquarters of tenderness and effort. Bertha learned his schedule the way one learns the weather, what days he blew in as thunder, what evenings he drifted in as soft rain. She packed his meals, added sticky notes to his laptop, pitch at 3, remember to breathe, you're not alone, and ironed away creases she couldn't smooth in his moods. When he paced while talking to suppliers, she mouthed the numbers with him so the room wouldn't feel like it was swallowing him whole. At night, she researched industries he mentioned and slid him links, saying, "Maybe this case study could help?" He would glance at her and smile. "Who needs a team when I have you?" "Let me help with the projections," she said one evening, laying a spreadsheet between them like a treaty. He teased her gently. "Since when did you become a numbers person?" She blushed. "Since you became my person." They worked side by side, her fingertips tapping formulas, his pen drawing arrows, the air warm with shared purpose. Bertha didn't ask for credit. She wanted him to win and believed victories braided together would not strangle either of them. On Sundays, when they walked hand in hand to the corner cafe, she told him stories from her childhood, how hope can be fed on little and still grow tall. Morris listened, head tilted, loving how her voice made even scarcity sound like a place with windows. Success did not arrive like a guest. It moved in and rearranged the furniture. New offices, faster cars, an apartment with a view that made the city look like something he could own. Morris adjusted quickly to rooms that waited for him and men who laughed before his punchlines landed. Bertha noticed the shift first in his posture, a chin lifted not by joy, but by measurement. "You're carrying a lot," she murmured, massaging his shoulders. "I'm carrying us," he said with a pride that tasted metallic. Meetings stretched longer, dinners became networking, and date nights slipped into another time. She chose understanding and covered the table with patience. At a champagne-soaked launch, Morris basked under lights that told him he was inevitable. Back home, Bertha sat with 2 plates growing cold and texted, "Should I wait?" He replied, "Eat, don't stress." When he came in, the scent of a stranger's perfume rode on his suit, expensive, floral, not hers. "Who was close to you?" she asked lightly, praying it was the air of a crowded room. "Investors," he said, dropping his keys like a period. She nodded, then followed him down the hall, wanting to keep the space human. "Remember our Saturday?" "Can't." "Board retreat," he said, not unkind, just preoccupied. In the dark, Bertha placed a hand over his sleeping chest and felt it thud with a rhythm she couldn't match anymore. Pride had a pulse, and it was louder than love's lullaby. The sky tore open on a Thursday. Rain driving against the windshield like the world had decided to speak only in urgency. Bertha tightened her grip on the steering wheel, wipers thrashing, headlights blurring into rivers. She should have waited. She should have called a cab. She should have done the thing hindsight always claims it would have done. A delivery truck swerved, and her small car skidded, a brief tremor turning into a spin. The impact was a flash of metal and sound, a violent punctuation. Then stillness, except for the rain and her ragged breath. She touched her face, felt wetness that wasn't rain, and closed her eyes to hold the pain in place. Hospital light is cruel, too honest, too bright. Bandages hugged her forehead and cheek. Stitches felt like a story written in a language she didn't understand. The nurse was kind and nameless, the doctor efficient and distant. Morris arrived late, guilt disguised as annoyance. "You scared me," he said, but his robe and damp hair told a different script. He had been somewhere else. "I'm okay," Bertha whispered, though that word no longer meant what it used to. "We'll fix it," he muttered, as if her face were a negotiation. She tried to smile, winced, and swallowed tears that tasted of metal. When he left to take a call, she stared at the ceiling and asked the quiet, If I am different on the outside, am I still me? Home again. The mirror waited like a witness she didn't remember summoning. Bertha stood before it in a robe tied too tightly, hands trembling. The scars were still tender, the swelling a leftover echo. She leaned in, then pulled back, breath catching. "Hello," she said to the girl in the glass, voice shaking. "You are still here." She practiced a smile. It wobbled, then fell. The door clicked. Morris stepped in, gaze darting, and then away as if eye contact with her reflection might indict him. "You're healing," he offered, mechanical gentleness. "Am I?" she asked, and the silence answered. Her phone buzzed. Renee's name lit the screen, a friend who had loved her before the glitter. Bertha answered on speaker, needing a witness. "Talk to me," Renee said. Bertha swallowed. "I don't know how to be in my skin." A pause, then Renee's steady warmth. "Your face tells a story that survived. People pay to look unreal. You were brave. That's better." Bertha let out a sound that wasn't quite a laugh. "Morris says we'll fix it." "Fix what?" Renee countered. "Beauty isn't a bill." The door creaked. Morris hovered, then retreated. "I have a dinner," he called. "Go," Bertha replied softly. When the apartment hushed again, she pressed her palm to the mirror, meeting her own hand. "You're allowed to be scarred and still be stunning," she told herself, trying on the sentence like a dress. For a while, he tried. He brought lilies she never liked and soup she didn't ask for, stood behind her at the mirror, and placed his hands on her shoulders as if choreography could fix sincerity. "We'll book the best surgeon," he said, scrolling options on his phone. "I want to heal," she whispered, "not disappear." He sighed, kissed her hair. "It's temporary." She looked at their reflection, the man talking solutions, the woman trying to salvage a self. In public, his voice softened, his arm bent for her to hold. In private, he slept turned away, dreams facing a wall. Then the pretense thinned. Dinners he couldn't move multiplied. He deflected with charm. I'm building something. Don't make me choose between vision and comfort." She had never asked him to. "I miss us," she said one midnight, voice small in a room that had grown large. He stared at the ceiling. "We change," he replied. "Life changes." "We?" she asked. He rolled over, phone lighting his face into a stranger's. In the kitchen, 2 wine glasses remained side by side on the rack, forever waiting. Bertha ran a fingertip along the rim of one and listened to the quiet ring it made, the sound of something delicate insisting on existing. Brittany arrived first as a rumor, then as a laugh too close to Morris's shoulder at a networking event. She was younger, styled to be noticed, fluent in the compliments that make men forget the difference between being admired and being evaluated. "You have a rare mind," she told him during a break, fingers brushing his sleeve as if by accident. "You deserve rooms that match your vision." He smiled like a man who had been handed a mirror that trims the parts he doesn't like. They exchanged numbers under the pretext of synergy. Their messages quickly learned to drop the costume. "You looked powerful tonight," Brittany wrote. "Come to the after hours. Only the real ones are coming." He typed, erased, typed again. "Send me the address." Later, in a car that hummed like expensive secrecy, Brittany laughed into his shoulder. "You're wasted at home," she said. "You should be with someone who understands momentum." He heard understands and thought it meant worships. When she asked about Bertha, he shrugged, she's adjusting, as if a wife were an app waiting for an update. Brittany tilted her head. "You can't be a comet and stay married to gravity." He knew it was cruel, knew he should correct her, but cruelty felt like a path that cleared itself as he walked. He went home smelling of someone else's night and told himself he was owed a life that matched his ambition. Shame would have kept it quiet. Pride gave it a spotlight. Morris, newly fluent in justification, began appearing with Brittany at events where cameras did not have to work hard to find them. "Client dinner," he'd say, adjusting his cufflinks while a photo of them laughing under a neon sign made its way to a gossip page. Bertha found the picture because the internet is never late. She stared at Brittany's hand on his chest, at the way his posture curved toward her like a word leaning into a sentence. When he came home, she held up the phone. "Is this business?" Her voice did not tremble. It was the steadiness of someone who had rehearsed pain. Morris exhaled, irritated by exposure. "Don't be dramatic." "I am being exact," Bertha answered. "Say her name." He met her eyes, chose the shortcut. Brittany. The syllables fell heavy. She's a colleague. Colleagues don't hold each other like that, Bertha whispered. The air sharpened. He turned away, grabbed a bag. I can't do this back and forth. I need peace. Peace? She echoed, the word tasting of metal. You mean permission? He paused, shoulders stiff. You've changed. I was rearranged, she said, touching her scars gently. That's not the same thing. The door closed softly, like a lie pretending to be kindness. Alone, Bertha sat on the edge of the bed and let the silence settle, not as defeat, but as a room preparing for a new voice she had not yet used. Morris sat in his office one late evening, the hum of the city beneath his window, rifling through a leather folder he had not touched in years. His eyes fell on the prenuptial agreement, the clause he had buried so long ago. He traced his finger over the words, failure to uphold her role as wife, and felt a twisted relief, as though the paper itself confirmed his righteousness. She cannot touch what I've built, he murmured, leaning back in his chair. His lawyer on the phone reassured him, the contract is airtight, Morris. Even if she leaves with nothing. A smug smile tugged at his lips, and yet behind it lay a flicker of unease he refused to acknowledge. That night when Bertha asked softly, Are you coming to bed? He muttered, Soon, without lifting his eyes. She lingered in the doorway, staring at the man who once promised to guard her heart, sensing something cold and locked away between them. She turned back to the bedroom alone, unaware that a single hidden clause had already been weaponized against her. The next morning, Morris carried himself with newfound arrogance, acting as if Bertha's silence was a leash he could tighten at will. He began staying out later, dressing with more attention, and walking into the house with the casual confidence of a man convinced of his own invincibility. At breakfast, Bertha pushed a plate toward him and asked, Do you ever think about us anymore? He raised a brow. I think about progress, Bertha. Don't tie me down with sentiment. She looked at him steadily, scars catching the morning light, and whispered, Love is not sentiment. It's the only progress that lasts. He scoffed, sipping his coffee. Contracts last, promises fade. She froze at the phrasing, a chill running through her, though she did not yet know its origin. The table between them felt wider than ever, as though their vows had already been cut neatly in two. The weeks that followed pressed Bertha into a solitude she could neither explain nor escape. Friends who once filled her afternoons with laughter grew scarce, their invitations dwindling under the weight of whispered judgments. At the market, she caught two women glancing at her scars, one muttering, Such a shame, she used to be so radiant. Bertha lowered her head and clutched her basket tighter, pretending not to hear, though the words gnawed at her long after she returned home. Even Renee, her old friend, called less frequently, her voice hurried when they did speak. Life's just so busy, Renee would say, though Bertha could sense hesitation underneath. The walls of the house echoed with Morris's absence, and she found herself standing at the window most nights, staring at headlights passing by, wondering how many lives were filled with companionship while hers hollowed quietly. One evening, she laid the table for two, a gesture of stubborn hope, and waited. Hours bled into silence until the food went cold. She blew out the candles, her chest aching, and whispered to the empty chair, Am I this easy to replace? The next morning, she walked into the bedroom where Morris was slipping on his tie. Morris, do you even see me anymore? She asked, voice fragile yet demanding an answer. He glanced at her briefly, then adjusted his cufflinks. Don't be dramatic, Bertha. Life doesn't stop because you want attention. She swallowed hard, the reply piercing more deeply than he intended. As he walked out the door, she stood before the mirror, tracing the scars on her face with her fingers, whispering to her reflection, If I disappear, will anyone notice? Her loneliness was no longer just a feeling. It was a second shadow, one that followed her into every room. When the invitation to the corporate gala arrived, Bertha almost declined, her instinct urging her to avoid the sharp glances of a world she no longer felt she belonged to. But something in her heart pushed her forward, an urge to step out of the prison of her walls. She wore a simple black gown, understated yet dignified, and wrapped a scarf lightly around her shoulders. As she entered the ballroom, conversations dimmed for a second, eyes tracing the faint scars across her face, then resumed with forced indifference. She held her head high, pretending not to notice, but inside her chest pulsed with both fear and defiance. Standing near the corner, she sipped water, unsure of where to place herself, when a voice beside her said warmly, "You wear your strength better than most wear jewels." She turned to see Daryl Gordon, a man whose presence commanded attention without demanding it. Bertha blinked, surprised by the directness. "Strength?" she asked softly. "I only feel tolerated." Daryl studied her face, his gaze neither pitying nor cruel. "Tolerated by the blind," he replied calmly. "Those who truly see no dignity when it stands before them." She looked away, emotions tangled, unprepared for such kindness, in a place where she had braced for cruelty. "I don't even know what to say," she murmured, adjusting her scarf. "Then don't," Daryl answered. "Just know that scars don't lessen beauty, they redefine it." His words settled over her like a cloak, heavier than flattery, lighter than obligation. For the first time in years, Bertha felt an unfamiliar warmth stirring inside, hope that maybe the world had not written her off completely. Bertha found herself beside Daryl again later that evening, seated at a quiet table away from the clamor of laughter and music. He asked her about her views on business, not in passing curiosity, but with genuine interest, leaning in as she spoke. "I've always believed growth isn't just numbers," she said hesitantly. "It's how people feel working toward the goal. If you crush their spirit, you'll have profit, but no loyalty." Daryl's eyes lit with approval. "You speak like someone who understands leadership, not just survival." She flushed slightly, unused to her voice carrying such weight. "I'm not a leader, Mr. Gordon," she insisted. He smiled gently. "Call me Daryl, and yes, you are perhaps not in title, but in essence." Their conversation flowed into unexpected places, her childhood memories of sharing bread in scarcity, his stories of rising from setbacks when rivals tried to undercut him. At one point, he laughed genuinely at her observation about people chasing wealth only to be imprisoned by it. "You are refreshing," he admitted. Bertha lowered her gaze. "I'm scarred." Daryl tilted his head, his tone steady. "Scarred and refreshing are not opposites, Bertha. Sometimes the most wounded carry the clearest wisdom." His words followed her long after she returned home. Lying awake, she replayed the conversation, whispering to herself, "He spoke as if I mattered." For the first time in years, her dreams carried not emptiness, but echoes of a voice that believed in her. In the weeks that followed, Daryl found subtle ways to cross Bertha's path again, an invitation to a seminar, a note passed through mutual acquaintances, a brief meeting in the lobby of a building where Morris once held dominance. Each encounter left her both nervous and oddly uplifted. "Why do you keep speaking to me?" she asked one afternoon after he caught her outside a bookstore. He regarded her calmly, his hands tucked in his pockets. "Because your mind intrigues me. You see beneath surfaces, Bertha, and in my world, that is rare." She shook her head. "People see the surface first, and mine is ruined." He smiled faintly. "Only to those who can't endure the depth of truth. I endure." Her heart thudded, caught between fear and the faint spark of being valued again. That evening at home, she studied herself in the mirror differently, repeating his words. Morris noticed her faint glow, narrowing his eyes. "Who have you been talking to?" he asked. She glanced at him, steady but soft. "Someone who listens," he scoffed, grabbing his jacket. "Men don't listen unless they want something." She paused, then whispered, almost to herself, "Maybe some men want something more than flesh." He didn't hear her, already out the door, but the silence that followed told Bertha something had shifted within her. The spark was faint, but it was real, and it frightened Morris more than he could admit. Daryl's persistence was not loud but deliberate, marked by respect rather than intrusion. He sent her articles with handwritten notes. "Thought you'd enjoy this insight." He invited her to a private luncheon with a small group of executives, then leaned back as she shared her thoughts, watching the table nod in agreement. "You make people listen," he told her afterward, "not because you demand it, but because you speak with truth." Bertha shook her head, overwhelmed. "You don't understand. At home, my words bounce off walls." He studied her face, his tone calm but piercing. "Then perhaps it is the walls that are wrong, not your voice." Back at home, Morris began to notice her growing poise. One evening, he asked sharply, "What's gotten into you lately?" Bertha looked up from the book she was reading, scars softened by lamplight. "Maybe I remembered I am more than silence." His eyes narrowed. "You've been talking too much with strangers." She closed the book gently, meeting his gaze. "Strangers who remind me I am not invisible." He left the room with a mutter, but her words hung in the air like a quiet declaration. The persistence of one man's belief had begun to plant roots inside her, roots that no amount of dismissal could easily uproot. It was at a private dinner that Brittany finally revealed her disdain in Bertha's presence. She approached the table where Morris sat with Bertha, her laughter sharp as broken glass. "Oh, Morris," Brittany cooed, "your wife is so brave, coming out despite everything." Her eyes flicked deliberately to Bertha's scars. The table chuckled uneasily, unsure whether to laugh or stay silent. Bertha clenched her jaw, her heart pounding, but she kept her composure. Morris laughed along weakly, patting Brittany's hand. "She's strong," he said, a statement that felt more mocking than supportive. Bertha sat still, pain surging like fire in her chest, but her eyes stayed fixed on her plate. Later at home, she confronted him. "You let her humiliate me." He shrugged, removing his watch. "It was a joke, Bertha. Don't be sensitive." Her voice cracked with fury. "It was cruelty, Morris. And you chose to laugh with her instead of standing with me." He waved dismissively. "Stop dramatizing everything. Brittany understands me in ways you never will." The words landed like blows, stripping away the remnants of her patience. She stood in silence, tears burning her eyes, then whispered, "One day, you will understand what you traded when you chose her laughter over my dignity." He looked at her but said nothing, unaware that the prophecy in her words had already begun its work. Weeks later, Daryl invited Bertha to a private strategy session with his board, explaining, "I want fresh eyes on a project we're struggling with. You see things differently." She hesitated, her hands twisting. "I'm not qualified." He shook his head. "Wisdom isn't a degree, Bertha. It's lived experience. Trust me." Reluctantly, she agreed. Sitting in that boardroom, she spoke softly at first, but as she explained her perspective, emphasizing empathy for workers, transparency in communication, and long-term trust, the room grew quiet, leaning in. When she finished, one director murmured, "She's right." Daryl smiled with satisfaction. "Told you she had clarity." Bertha blinked, stunned by the validation she had not felt in years. Afterward, as they walked out, she whispered, "Why did you believe in me enough to bring me there?" Daryl replied calmly, "Because I see what Morris never did. You have a rare ability to turn pain into insight. That's leadership." Her chest tightened, torn between gratitude and sorrow for the love that had once dismissed her. That evening, she sat by her window at home, whispering to herself, "He believes in me. Why does that feel more healing than all the promises Morris ever made?" In the reflection on the glass, she saw her scars, but for the first time, they did not look like chains. They looked like symbols of survival. The whispers that once mocked Bertha began to change their tune. At luncheons and meetings, people spoke quietly about the scarred woman who offered perspectives executives hadn't considered. Some called her resilient, others called her graceful, but all agreed she was not to be underestimated. One evening, as she left a conference hall, two women approached her. "We admired what you said about leadership," one confessed. "It made me rethink how I run my team." Bertha smiled softly, overwhelmed. At home, however, Morris grew uneasy. "People are starting to talk about you," he said. "They're curious why." She met his eyes calmly. "Because I finally spoke, and they listened." Brittany, irritated by Bertha's growing reputation, sneered during a gathering. "Let's not pretend scars are wisdom. People are just being polite." Bertha responded evenly, "Politeness ends when you leave the room. If they listen, it's because I've given them something worth hearing." Daryl, overhearing, smiled faintly but said nothing, knowing her poise needed no defense. Brittany turned away, fuming. Morris watched the exchange with a mixture of resentment and unease. That night, he asked her, "Do you enjoy embarrassing me?" She looked at him steadily. "No, Morris. I enjoy remembering that I exist." His silence was thick, but in his eyes flickered the first signs of fear, that the woman he had diminished was beginning to rise in ways he could not control. Bertha's confidence began to blossom, though quietly, like a flower opening in its own time. She no longer walked into rooms shrinking. She held her head high, her scars illuminated by grace rather than shame. At a conference where Daryl was speaking, she asked a pointed question that left the audience murmuring with admiration. "Courage," Daryl said later, walking beside her, "is not the absence of fear. It's deciding your voice matters even when others doubt it." She smiled faintly. "I'm learning that." He nodded. "And you're learning it well." Back home, Morris noticed the change, the way she moved with subtle assurance. "You look different these days," he muttered one evening. She turned to him calmly. "I feel different. For the first time in years, I feel like I'm not apologizing for existing." His expression hardened. "Careful, Bertha. Don't let admiration get to your head." She met his gaze, her voice steady. "It's not admiration I crave, Morris. It's self-respect. And I've finally remembered what that feels like." He turned away, but the words lodged in his chest like a stone he couldn't swallow. The woman he thought had vanished into silence was returning, not as the same wife he once possessed, but as someone who no longer needed his validation to survive. The dinner was set in a private dining room, candles flickering against polished wood, the hum of distant music filling the air. Daryl had invited Bertha under the pretense of discussing her ideas further, but as the evening deepened, his tone shifted. He leaned forward, his eyes steady. "There's something I need to tell you, Bertha. Something about Morris." She stiffened, the fork pausing midair. "What do you mean?" He exhaled, fingers drumming lightly on the table. "Years ago, when Morris was still trying to build his empire, he came to me desperate for funding. I gave it to him, but in return, I took controlling shares of his company. He never speaks of it, but the truth is, he's never had complete ownership." Bertha's chest tightened, her heart pounding with disbelief. "You mean everything he boasts about, all his pride?" Her voice trailed off. Daryl nodded gravely. "It's built on a deal he cannot escape." Bertha looked down, her hands trembling. "And you're telling me this now because—" Daryl's voice softened. "Because I want you to understand the power you have just by standing beside me. He knows it. That's why he's restless every time you're near. Bertha, the empire he used to belittle you with, it bends in my direction. And now, with you at my side, his arrogance will no longer protect him." She swallowed, her throat dry, a swirl of emotions battling within her. Anger, vindication, fear. "I never asked for revenge," she whispered. Daryl reached across the table, his hand brushing hers respectfully. "I know. That's what makes you different. But the truth will unfold, whether you seek it or not." Bertha drew in a shaky breath, realizing that her silent endurance had become the very key to Morris's unraveling. That night, Bertha returned home, her mind a whirlwind of revelations. Morris was already there, pacing the living room with a drink in hand. "You're late," he said sharply, narrowing his eyes. "Where were you?" She set down her clutch and met his gaze with newfound strength. "I was with Daryl, and I know everything." His hand froze mid-sip, the glass lowering slowly. "Everything?" he asked, feigning ignorance. Her voice quivered but remained firm. "The deal, the contract you signed. You've built this empire on sand, Morris. You've been boasting about a throne that was never fully yours." His face darkened, the mask of confidence faltering. "He had no right to tell you," he snapped. She took a step closer. "He had every right. You lied to me, Morris. All those years you made me feel small, powerless, while you yourself were shackled." Morris slammed the glass onto the table, liquid spilling. "You don't understand business, Bertha. Those were survival choices." She shook her head, tears brimming. "No, what I don't understand is how you could use my pain as your excuse for betrayal. You let me drown in silence while you strutted around pretending to be invincible." He rubbed his temples, voice sharp with frustration. "Don't you dare lecture me. You're still my wife." Bertha's lips tightened, her reply cold and deliberate. "Your wife, yes, but no longer your shadow." She turned away, leaving him standing there, rattled for the first time in years. The empire he thought indestructible, suddenly fragile in the face of a woman he had underestimated. The next morning, Morris walked into the boardroom confident, rehearsing his usual speech. But as he adjusted his tie and looked up, his blood ran cold. Bertha was seated beside Daryl, her poise undeniable, her scars glowing under the soft light like marks of authority. Whispers rippled through the room as she straightened her notes, ignoring the shock in Morris's eyes. "Let's begin," Daryl announced smoothly, nodding at Bertha. "She will be offering insights on today's agenda." Morris slammed his folder shut. "What is the meaning of this?" His voice thundered, but Daryl's calm smile cut him down. "It means your wife is more than you ever acknowledged. And today, the room will hear her voice." Bertha inhaled, her hands steady as she spoke. "This company thrives on numbers, but people don't respond to figures. They respond to trust, to the stories we tell them. If you continue operating with arrogance, you'll lose not just profits, but loyalty." The board members leaned forward, nodding. One chimed in, "She's right. That's what we've been missing." Morris's face flushed crimson, sweat dotting his brow. "She knows nothing about business," he snapped. Daryl's expression hardened. "On the contrary, she knows the heart of it. And that's what sustains companies long after profits fade." Morris's voice faltered, the room's silence pressing against him like a verdict. Bertha closed her folder, meeting his gaze with calm fire. "You taught me to survive in silence, Morris. But today, I choose to speak." The boardroom emptied after the meeting, but Morris lingered, glaring at Bertha. "You had no right to humiliate me in front of them," he hissed. She turned slowly, her face serene. "I didn't humiliate you, Morris. You did that yourself when you underestimated me." He stepped closer, his voice low and sharp. "You think Daryl will protect you. He's using you." She met his accusation with a quiet strength. "No, he's respecting me. There's a difference. Something you forgot how to do a long time ago." Morris clenched his fists, words choking in his throat, but no reply came. For the first time, his silence wasn't power, it was defeat. Bertha picked up her purse and moved toward the door, pausing briefly. "Do you know what struck me today?" she asked softly, her back to him. "You always believed my scars made me weak. But in that room they made me strong, because every person there saw I had endured. And endurance is something money cannot buy." Morris's jaw tightened, his pride bleeding into panic. "Bertha," he began, but she walked out before he could finish, her heels echoing against the polished floor like a declaration. Alone in the empty boardroom, Morris sank into a chair, the walls closing in. For years he had wielded power like a weapon. Now, confronted by her voice, he realized that the silence he once demanded had become the very thing stripping him bare. Brittany arrived at Morris's penthouse later that evening, her heels clicking against marble. "What happened at the board meeting?" she asked, her voice tinged with curiosity more than concern. Morris poured himself a drink, his movements agitated. "She humiliated me, in front of everyone, with Daryl at her side." Brittany tilted her head, eyes narrowing. "Sounds like he's the one holding the strings." "And if that's the case, Morris, you're not as powerful as I thought." He turned sharply, glaring at her. "What are you saying?" She crossed her arms, her lips curling into a mocking smile. "I don't attach myself to sinking ships. I need stability, wealth, security. If you can't give me that anymore, then why am I here?" Morris's face drained of color. "You can't be serious. After everything." Brittany shrugged. "You gave me gifts, dinners, trips. I gave you company. Transaction complete." She reached for her purse, her tone final. "Daryl's empire will only grow. Yours is crumbling. I choose wisely." Morris lunged forward, gripping her wrist. "Don't you dare walk away from me." She yanked free, her laugh cruel. "Bertha may have scars, but you're the one bleeding now." The door slammed behind her, leaving Morris trembling, his glass shattering against the wall. For the first time, he stood in his lavish penthouse completely alone, realizing that the woman he mocked had risen higher than he could reach, while the woman he flaunted had vanished at the first sign of weakness. Sleep became a stranger to Morris. Each night he lay awake, haunted by visions of Bertha seated beside Daryl, her voice resonant, her dignity restored. In his mind, she no longer looked broken. She glowed, and the glow seared him with regret. He tossed, turned, replayed conversations he once dismissed. "Don't shut me out," she had whispered months ago. He had laughed then, but now the echo twisted into a knife. He rose from bed, pacing the dark corridors of his home, muttering, "She was mine. She should have stayed mine. Yet beneath the anger was fear, the kind that gnawed relentlessly, reminding him that he had built his world on arrogance and betrayal. In the office, the same visions plagued him. When he entered meetings, he saw whispers, eyes darting toward Bertha's name, respect floating in the air around her like incense. He slammed doors, barked at assistants, but nothing silenced the truth. The power he once claimed had shifted, and it was slipping from his grasp. Alone in his study, he poured another drink, staring at the hidden contract in his drawer. "I thought I was clever," he murmured bitterly. "But she's the one winning." He slammed the drawer shut, gripping his head. For the first time in his career, Morris realized regret was not a moment. It was a shadow that followed, the whispering of everything he had lost when he chose pride over love. The house grew quieter with each passing day. Brittany was gone, the calls from friends fewer, the dinners colder. Morris wandered the halls, staring at photographs he once displayed proudly, himself and Bertha in happier days, her smile radiant, his hand firm around her waist. He pulled one down, staring at her youthful face, whispering, "Where did we lose it, Bee?" His voice cracked, but there was no answer. One evening, he attempted to call her. When she picked up, her tone was calm but distant. "Morris," he exhaled shakily. "Can we talk?" "Just us?" She paused. "About what?" He swallowed. "About us. About what we were." Her silence stretched, then she replied gently, "Morris, what we were is gone. You destroyed it." She hung up softly, leaving him clutching the phone as though it were his last tether. In desperation, he began showing up at events, trying to reclaim the respect that had once come easily. But whispers followed him like shadows. "That's Morris, the one losing grip. His wife speaks with more authority than him now." The murmurs ate at him, each word a reminder of his crumbling image. At night, he sat in the darkened kitchen, nursing another drink, his reflection staring back from the window pane. "I wanted to be a king," he whispered bitterly, "but I threw away my crown." His voice cracked, and he buried his face in his hands. The mansion, once a symbol of triumph, now pressed against him like a prison of his own making. Meanwhile, Bertha walked into rooms with a presence that silenced whispers. She no longer shrank under the weight of stares. Her scars told a story people leaned in to hear. At a panel where she was invited to speak, she shared her truth without bitterness. "Life has a way of reshaping us. I thought scars made me lesser. But I've learned they are proof that I endured, and endurance is its own kind of beauty." The audience erupted into applause, some wiping tears. Daryl stood at the back, his chest swelling with pride, knowing she had finally stepped fully into herself. Bertha smiled through the applause, her heart light. She was not performing for anyone's approval, she was simply living her truth. Afterward, a young woman approached, tears in her eyes. "Mrs. Morris, you gave me courage. I have scars too, and I hide them every day. But seeing you speak like that, maybe I can stop hiding." Bertha embraced her gently. "Don't let the world define you by what you've survived. Let them admire how you continue." That night, as she sat with Daryl, she confessed softly, "I never thought I'd find strength again." He looked at her with quiet conviction. "Strength never left you, Bertha. It was just waiting for you to see it." For the first time, she believed it. Her poise, once fragile, had become unshakable, and it was this grace, not revenge, that made Morris's downfall complete. Unable to bear the silence any longer, Morris showed up at Bertha's door one evening, his eyes hollow, his shoulders heavy. She opened it slowly, surprise flickering across her face. "Morris," his voice broke, "please let me in." She hesitated, then stepped aside. He walked into her living room, staring at the simple space, so different from their mansion. "You look stronger," he murmured. She folded her arms. "What do you want?" His eyes filled with tears. "I want us back. I want you. I made mistakes, Bertha. I was blind." Her voice remained calm, though her chest tightened. "Blindness is one thing, but you chose to mock me, to betray me. That wasn't blindness, it was cruelty." He sank onto the couch, covering his face. "His scars, I thought they changed you. But now I see, they only showed me how much I failed you." Tears spilled as he looked up at her. "Give me another chance, please." Bertha sat opposite him, her gaze steady. "You want forgiveness? I can give you that. But you want my return, my love, my trust. That, Morris, you destroyed with your own hands." He sobbed, the sound raw, but she did not move to comfort him. Instead, she whispered, "I survived without you, and in surviving, I found myself again." He lowered his head, realizing her words were final. The silence stretched, heavy and absolute, a verdict he could not appeal. The following week, Bertha attended another gathering, this time standing beside Daryl as his equal. The crowd greeted her with respect, their admiration no longer tinged with pity, but with reverence. She wore a gown that shimmered softly, her scars illuminated like threads of strength woven into her face. Daryl leaned down and whispered, "You've become the story everyone will remember." She smiled faintly, not because of beauty, but because of survival. He nodded, and that is far greater. Together, they walked into the hall, her hand resting lightly on his arm, her head held high. Across the city, Morris sat in his study, staring at the empty glass in his hand, the empire he once ruled now slipping further from his reach. Photographs of him and Bertha lay scattered on the floor, his mind consumed by memories he could not rewrite. "She was mine," he whispered hoarsely, "and I let her go." But regret was no cure, it was a punishment, circling him endlessly. Meanwhile, Bertha stood in her truth, no longer bound by shame or silence. She had forgiven, but she had not returned. Her scars were not her downfall, they were her crown, proof of her endurance. For Morris, the final chapter was not loss of wealth, but the unbearable knowledge that in trying to secure power, he had lost the only treasure that truly mattered.
And that wraps up today's story. Now we want to hear from you. Where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments, and let's see how far these stories reach. If this story moved you or gave you chills, give it a like, share, and subscribe for more powerful stories. One last thing, rate the story from 1 to 10 in the comments. Your feedback helps us bring you even better ones next time. Thanks for watching. We appreciate you being part of this storytelling journey.